Small island states are one of the most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. We're surrounded by ocean, and it affects our coral reefs. There's increase in the frequency and the intensity of storms. It leads to flooding and storm surges. Most of our critical infrastructure is less than 100 meters from the shoreline in most of the islands, and therefore this affects us in tremendously every time such an incident happens. So therefore, climate change is very real, and the impacts are affected severely on small island states. And this means that our adaptation efforts have to be commensurate with the kind of risks that we're facing. And it involves protection of our critical infrastructure. It affects our water supply. It affects our disaster response, which means that we use our very limited budgets to respond to these events, which would otherwise be used for healthcare, social security, education, and our development, essentially. So climate change is not only affecting us environmentally, it's also setting us back in our development trajectory, and which is why it's really important to consider climate in how we do development and also build our resilience. So as I mentioned before, small island states are often middle-income countries, and which means that we are not eligible for grants, and we have advanced in our economies to a level where our GDP is well, but however, as I mentioned before, we have a lot of environmental impacts. And oftentimes, at least I can speak for the Maldives, we have a very limited fiscal capacity because of our debt, and therefore this limits our ability to get access to climate finance. And finance is necessary for us to do our development, and oftentimes we are actually borrowing at commercial rates to do our adaptation. So one of the really important things that needs to happen is to figure out how we could access climate finance at accessible rates and something that would not further impact our limited fiscal capacity. So that is really important. I also think that for a climate resilient country, we need the right skill set that is required for the resilient economy that we're building, that will use new technologies and know how to address the climate adaptation. So climate change is something that will affect all countries. It does not respect borders, and it is a transboundary issue which has cascading effects across different regions of the world. And therefore, it is really important that we're able to take collective action, because without collective action and without increasing our adaptive capacities together, it is going to be impossible to be resilient in any part of the world. And for this, multilateralism is really important, and international cooperation is essential for our future. And at a time when there's withdrawal from the multilateral process and the current geopolitical context, it becomes even more important that we maintain a system that is credible, that takes the voices of the most vulnerable at heart, and that is transparent and accountable and work for the collective good, in a sense. And I think that without these systems in place, it's going to be very challenging to address a global challenge like the current climate crisis.